Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining me for my session on unconscious bias with the hope of slowing down your fast thinking for your work in general, your life in general, but also you might be able to apply this to any prospective research that you get involved in. So just briefly, my name is Fionnuala Darby and I'm a senior lecturer with the School of Business and I'm based in the Blanchardstown campus. I'm also the campus champion out there on unconscious bias in terms of training and development of staff. And I've been doing that for the past year. So this is some of the content that I'm sharing with you today is what I would do with staff around just exercising our muscle, I suppose, on unconscious bias and becoming more aware of it. So for the short time that we have together, I'm hoping to make you more aware of this concept and to highlight some aspects of it, to look at the impact of it in your working lives, in research that you might get involved in, and to show you, I suppose, what it can look like, the impact of it in action as well. And if time, then I'm going to share some findings of my own doctorate research that I've recently submitted on our Black and minority ethnic students on the TU Dublin Blanchardstown campus, because of course our unconscious biases can filter in there. I have an image of a book up there that I was recommended to read when I was being trained up in this area. It's a great title. It's called Whistling Vivaldi by Claude Steele. And in one of the opening chapters in the book, he refers to a guy called Brent Staples, who was a psychology graduate at the time when he's talking about the context in Chicago. And he was walking around the very affluent neighborhood of Hyde Park, if any of you are familiar with that area. And he encounters a white couple coming at him. Two things happened, very minor micro behaviors. The male in the couple put his arm a little bit more protectively around the female, and the female in the couple, she gripped her handbag slightly tighter to her. Now, Brent Staples had become an expert in reading this language, and he called it the language of fear. And the issue was that he had become so used to a negative stereotype about him based on his ethnicity, that he had devised a way to deflect that threat. And what he did was he whistled Vivaldi. And Vivaldi is a famous Italian composer. We will probably know him most for the composition, The Four Seasons. And the minute he whistled that song, Whistling Vivaldi, the tension in the air just fell away. And the couple nodded at each other and walked on by. So I suppose he was building up, there was a build-up of an accumulation there around how he had been stereotyped and he had found a way to deal with it. And suppose my first question to you, and I know I have some support here from a colleague around the chat box, so feel free to pop in anything you want to ask me on the chat box and we'll take a break after every couple of slides to see what's coming up there. But my first question for you is, do we all have biases? And any of you that have answered yes, you're through to the next round. We do. We all have biases. That's how we are raised, the information we process, the people we hang around with, and our understandings of the world are partial and they reflect the circumstances of our lives. So I suppose success in this area comes from within. So I'm just asking you to stay open and stay curious to the content that I'm going to share with you. So I suppose, first of all, what is it? Unconscious bias are our unintentional people preferences. When we pare it all back, that's exactly what it is. And what's happening is our unconscious mind is automatically categorizing people based on what we see, how they sound, what they're wearing, the color of their hair, the height of their heels, are they a smoker or not? All of these little things, we automatically start to categorize people. What happens then is we're making rapid decisions about these people, but it's based on limited information, generally speaking. And I suppose now that I've been speaking for about a minute, you have already, anyone listening to me has formed their first impression of me. I don't want to know what that is, but you do know an awful lot less about somebody after 30 seconds than you do after about 30 minutes, which will be the case in an interview. But our first impressions are highly influential and our brain sort of jumps ahead and does that categorizing unknown to us really. And so I would ask you, how powerful is your name, not even your appearance, before you even get into the interview? How powerful is your name in securing a job offer? Well, if you have a look at the image on the other side of the screen here, this is Keo Anasik, and she embarked on a career change. She sent out her CV to respective employers and she heard nothing. She then changed her name to Kayla Benjamin, and about 10 days after sending out her CV, she had secured a new job. And it was only when she changed her name to a name that people could perhaps pronounce easier because of their position in the organization. She had changed her alter ego as a result, and she managed to get a foot in the door. So it's not just your name, it could be your postal address, as I said, your appearance, and so on. What about your accent is my next question. And again, if you have any answers to this, you can pop them into the chat and I'll come back to it in a minute. But I wanted to ask you, and I've struggled to find Irish research on accents and how they might affect your chances at an interview and so on. But I have found English research, and I wanted to ask you, what do you think the top 5 accents voted most likely to hinder your career? So again, in a UK context, just pop down what you think those accents might be, and I'll come back in a minute and let you know what they are. So I would say to you that there is no group on earth that hasn't been stereotyped in some way. The young, the old, people from the country, city folk, even within Dublin, Northsiders and Southsiders, people with tattoos, people who read the Irish Times, we've all been categorized. And if the stereotype is negative, then you can feel a threat and a pressure not to conform to that stereotype. And also, if the stereotype about you is negative, that can have an accumulation over time on your well-being. So to come back to that question on the top 5 accents voted most likely to hinder your career, I'm just going to ask Linda if there's anything coming in there, and if not, I can give you some answers. You're just on mute there, Linda.
Fionnuala, you're explaining really well here. I don't have any questions as of yet, but I'll certainly come in and put them to you if any come in. So we do have a few visitors I can see interestingly listening to you. So,
no problem. Well, I'll just let you know that the top 5 accents most likely to hinder your career from a UK perspective are the Liverpool accent, the London Cockney accent, so that East Ender accent that you might be familiar with, the Brummie accent, Birmingham, Glasgow and Manchester. So it will be interesting to see if there's anything from an Irish perspective to come out on that research-wise. Okay, so our unconscious biases then causes us to stereotype. So stereotype is this mass generalization we put on a group of people, and we don't maybe look at the individual differences that people bring. And we all do this. And what we're doing is, if you break down that next word, prejudice, we prejudge somebody. And if you're in a position of power or decision-making role, that can then play out with regard to discrimination. So we categorize people into in-groups and out-groups, and the most common biases will be based on these characterizations here. So physical characteristics, so again, judgments on age, ethnicity, gender, and disability. People with a similar or dissimilar background to us, again, based on culture, nationality, your education, your religion, your sexuality. We tend to gravitate maybe to people with more shared interests to us in terms of research that they're doing, or discipline, or hobbies, or causes. And again, you could probably look at who you might be following on Twitter or other social media platforms that would share similar interests to you. And also, maybe we kind of run with our tribe in terms of people with a similar lifestyle, socioeconomically, or in terms of appearance. And what's going on here is that you now have a frame of reference for the person. But if we go about our lives and we go about our work and we go about our research all the time with just like-minded individuals, our learning is impoverished then. So it is good to shake it up and to bring in that difference. The psychological explanation behind this is that unconscious bias is a bias. Unfortunately for us, we're unaware of it, and hopefully we'll be more aware of it after this session. It does happen outside of our control, that overwhelming power of first impressions that we have. It's automatically triggered by the rapid processing of information. And a lot of the time, our biases are influenced by our own background, our own culture, what we heard in school, from family members, in the media, and so on. And I suppose a good starting point with regard to your unconscious bias is to try to view as far as possible from the other perspective. Just to share with you the exact opposite of unconscious bias, that is affinity bias. And that's a feeling of closeness and understanding that somebody has for another person based on qualities, similar qualities, ideas, or interests. And that's what draws us to friendship groups, maybe a life partner, and so on. That commonness, accompanied with that comfort we find with somebody who's similar to us, gives us trust. We trust that person more. And that's fine. As I said, that's how we form our friendship groups, and maybe end up being attracted to some people other than others. But in an organization, if you operate from the position of affinity bias the whole time and you just surround yourself with people who are very similar to you, that can actually influence who you see as competent, who you hire, who do you listen to more, who do you give more feedback to, and so on. And the issue there is if you're not treating all staff the same with regard to the diverse staff, then there might be a hidden advantage to staff who you feel fall into that affinity bias category for you. Just of an example there of Google, and Google says that unconscious bias is why they don't have a diverse workplace. And actually, when you look at the statistics with regard to the demographics of their staff, it's 0.00 something in terms of diversity. And they talk to their mobile video uploads, the team that built that iOS YouTube app. They never considered left-hand users when they were designing that. So anyone, a left-hand user had to nearly rotate the phone all the way around, or the screen kept flipping in them. So that's a really simple idea of having a more inclusive decision-making team so that something like that, doesn't happen. Again, I'm just going to pause in case there's any questions there, or if you want to give me a thumbs up, Linda, I'll keep going.
You're doing well. We don't have any questions just yet.
No problem.
Thank you.
Okay, so I've listed here on this slide the most common types of unconscious bias. It's certainly not an exhaustive list, but I just wanted to highlight a couple of these as the more common ones that we're likely to default into. The first one there is attribution bias, and this is our tendency, our inclination to explain behavior differently for different people. So if somebody is quite similar to you, like based on those categories I've mentioned already, and they're successful, we tend to explain their success as being down to them and their hard work and so on. And if they fail at something or don't reach a certain standard, we say that it's something outside of their control. We do the exact opposite in terms of attribution bias with regard to attributing success and failure for people who are less like us. Just to pick another one there, source bias. I think this one is really important, especially if you've taken on some postgraduate research. What about the sources of your information and what biases are coming into those? So do always check, let's say, the funder, what's behind the report, where's the source of the information coming from. And I suppose as an educator, this is a challenge that I encounter a lot with the students. Where are they getting their information from? How sound is it? Is it all driven by social media and so on? That you do have to dig a little deeper into sources, especially in a research context. Another one there, primacy, recency and impact bias. And the best way to explain this one is the difference between flying and driving. And I just wanted to ask you, how likely is it for you to come to your death in terms of being in an aircraft or a car crash or a plane crash? And again, if you want to put it into the chat, I'll come back to it in a moment. And also your bias blind spot. This is one where we fail or we just don't see our own biases. And the only way we can find out about them, certainly in a work context, is the importance of feedback and performance appraisal and stereotyping, like I've already mentioned. So which is more dangerous, flying or driving? Well, the answer is you're likely to lose your life more by driving, car driving, than flying. We'd want about 2 Boeing 747 aircrafts, packed capacity, full crew on board, and they'd want to be crashing with no survivors twice every week for flying to be as dangerous as driving. Yet sometimes the sensational headlines come from the airline crash because so many are killed at once, whereas the car crash, we've nearly become numbed to the fatalities there. And that's the importance of checking going back further with your information, not just looking at something that's been quite recent in terms of informing your decision. Okay, so just there on the next slide, I've looked at some triggers here in terms of how our unconscious biases can be, when is the button pressed on them? Very often, these are the things people will list, and it's that their work has become very complex, their lives have become very complex, and they're trying to process information that's contradictory from so many sources. That can lead us to jump ahead and make maybe rapid decisions. If you have too much workload, and you're just trying to firefight, your biases can kick in then. If you're rushing, you're stressed, you're anxious, and you're frustrated, again, our default position can be to make decisions possibly without thinking it through. If you feel threatened in terms of work with regard to resources or positioning, watch this one, get the donuts into you. Lack of glucose. So when your blood sugars drop, we tend to maybe not make, there's less clarity in our decision making. And if we're tired or we're trying to draw an overall conclusion as well. These are the times when we're most susceptible to bias. And to be honest, if you look at that list there, they probably look like most people's workplaces or your lives. So we really need to be more conscious of those unconscious biases in order to slow down our thinking. So here's what's happening in the brain. We have two systems in our brain, system 1 and system 2. System 1 is known as the unconscious brain, and this thinks extremely quickly. It's that fight or flight response, which has massive resources available to it in terms of all the information we've processed over the years. And this is the first impressions kicking in, rapid processing based on pigeonholing or stereotyping. Our conscious brain is the system 2 brain, and it's much slower. It thinks slowly. It relies on rules or policies or systems to make the decisions, and it has limited processing power. So straight away, I'm presuming any of you listening can't give me the answer to 4217s, that you'd need pen or paper or a calculator to work it out. So it's that slowing down of decisions when they're more complex, and you need to involve more people or certainly more information. Okay, and then to move on to the impacts of these unconscious biases, I spoke a little bit a few minutes ago about this commonness and this comfort leading to trust some people. And when that happens in a workplace, we can tend to see some people as more competent than others. So how does that play out on a day-to-day basis? Well, we tend to, in terms of listening, we tend to listen and value the opinions of people who are wired like us or similar to us. So we might be giving them more airtime or listening to them more. We tend to recruit people who look like us, sound like us, went to the same school as us, come from the same area as us, so to watch it there. Certainly in the UK, a CV with a white British name waits 9 applications before getting shortlisted, whereas an Asian or Black African name could wait up to 15 or 16 times. And that's just based on the name on the application form. And certainly one of the areas I teach is HR, and I would be very much in favour of blind selection. So removing all the personal data off the application form and assessing the candidate based on what's on it, regardless, instead of what they sound like, look like, where they come from, or their name. Your your work allocation is next there. Do you think we're more likely to allocate difficult tasks or challenging tasks or risky tasks to people like us or people less like us? And again, if you want to pop it into the chat, I'll come back to it. So you're in charge of allocating work to people. Will you give the challenging tasks to people more like you, or the opposite? And again, I'll come back to that, as I said. Performance management, always tricky when you have to give negative and positive, negative feedback to people. The positive one is easy. When we're given less favorable feedback, we tend to be more upfront and trustworthy with it with people like us, and we maybe hold back when people are less like us because we're just a little bit unsure as to how they might react. So to watch that with performance appraisal and feedback in general. And also with regard to informal coaching, mentoring and sponsorship, we tend to spend time with people often like us who share our interests, our hobbies and our backgrounds. And again, all of these have the effect maybe of catapulting or propelling some people more forward in their career than others. Just to go back to that work allocation question, we tend to attribute tricky or challenging work to people more like us, is the answer there. So again, something for you to consider maybe after this talk. Can you think of any patterns within your context when you have maybe jumped or experienced these quick assumptions? And again, it could be something like as minor as someone's hair color and what that triggers for you, their age, their gender, their sexual orientation, their body weight, and so on. It certainly gives us food for thought. And the issue here is when the brain fires together, it wires together and we come up with all sorts of assumptions. So try this stereotyping exercise. Again, if you want to put them into chat, or if you want to stay muted and just shout them out, identify the stereotypes that you have heard about these groups of people. So again, all I want to know is sort of, you can capture them yourself, the first things that come into your head when you see these. So white women, what's the stereotype? Japanese people, the residents of Dublin's South Side, people under 30, people with a college degree, French men, Italian women, people who are married, engineers, and accountants. And straight away, we automatically think of something here. So to give you some of the things that I've heard from the students over the years when I asked this, they say that married people are boring. They say that people from Dublin and the South Side are posh. When they hear about Japanese people, they think of tech, Nike, and so on, these brands. Accountants are boring. Engineers are intelligent, and so on. I suppose what I wanted to ask you about those categories, which one was the one hardest to answer? And the answer there is it's generally a category that refers to you. So when you see white women up there at the top and you are a white woman trying to answer that question, you find it a little more difficult because, well, you don't feel that you fit the stereotype, yet we tend to stereotype everyone outside of our category. So I suppose it's just something to keep an eye on. This slide frightens me a little bit because while I've spoken about unconscious bias in terms of gender and religion and ethnicity and those obvious categories, we can actually broaden out unconscious bias. Oops, sorry, I'll go back one. We can also broaden them out to these categories here. We have unconscious biases with regard to height, body weight, people with beards, their age, your physical attractiveness, your marital status, and so on. So if you look at the height one there, according to the Fortune 500 companies, you learn more as a male if you are in excess of 6 foot and by every 6.3 centimeters, you're expected to earn about €3,000 plus more as a male, and as a female, around half of that. So that we see height as strength, as that we trust it, that it's something that's noteworthy, yet the competence mightn't be even behind it. If you look at body weight for extra kilos that you're carrying, for a female, she can expect, for a male, he can expect a reduction of about €234 in salary. But look at the females, they get really walloped for carrying the extra pounds or being fond of the cream puffs, expecting a salary reduction of about in excess of 2,000. Bearded faces are seen as less competent, apparently. Yet I think having a beard today, depending on the sector that you're in, has come full circle in terms of it being kind of trendy and cool. Yet when I have run these sessions, participants have said to me that they know of a family member or a neighbour who shaved their beard before they went in for an interview. So again, our association with that. The last two there on the slide, Anna face, I should say that this one comes with a warning. It's not for the faint-hearted. You can upload a picture of yourself to that website and it'll give you a score of between 1 and 10 of your physical attractiveness if you want to find out what that is. And the other one there is with regard to men in work who are deciding on promotions, and sometimes their unconscious bias there can be when they're deciding on a female for promotion, it will be influenced by their own female partner and the amount of hours she works outside the home. I would say that imagery is hugely powerful as well with regard to bias. This image stood out for me a couple of months back. This is Jonathan Rees-Mogg in the centre. He's a member of the Conservative Party, a serving MP, and characterised as socially conservative on a wide range of issues. And here he was launching his new party, Global Britain. And I think when you look at the image, you do kind of question what and who they're standing for there. And this one stood out to me as well in these recent COVID times. I noticed this on social media. So the Small to Medium Enterprises Recovery were inviting people to a launch of the National Business Recovery Plan. And again, I suppose just lacking diversity there in the lineup. And when you can't see or identify with that, it can be quite exclusionary and isolating. So again, just to almost there to finish up on some micro behaviors. So like unconscious bias isn't kind of a big bang. It can be quite a subtle level behavior below our awareness. So unnoticeable micro behaviors such as paying a little less attention to what another person is saying, addressing them less warmly, or talking to them less. So I suppose it's just to, I guess, to watch these behaviors in a work setting. So whose hand do you shake? Well, they're not shaking anyone's now. Who do you acknowledge when they come into the room and who do you don't? When you're given a presentation, do you make eye contact with everyone or not? And it's just these little things. And sometimes people say you're being oversensitive. But actually, until you're on the receiving end of this time and time again, that's when it accumulates and builds up for you. And just to finish with my own research, I've recently submitted my doctorate thesis, and it kind of does float into this area on unconscious bias, because I looked at belonging on campus for our BME students, Black minority ethnic students in higher education, in particular on the Blanchardstown campus. And I looked at their sense of inclusion and belonging on campus or not. I suppose there was limited research in this area, and I wanted to give voice to the experience of these students in higher education, and I wanted to find out if the campus itself included them or excluded them, the physical landscape, but also inside the classroom, what was it like for them being a minority. I used the various methods to look at that. I used photo voice, where they photographed places and spaces that included them and excluded them. I also followed up with interviews and focus groups. And then I looked for patterns in the data, and I used thematic analysis. So I had 45 different research participants in the study, predominantly students, but I also took the findings to staff. And again, very broad overarching themes that emerged was, well, for us, I suppose thankfully we found that the students seem to say that they do feel that they belong on campus, they feel included, yet when I dug a little deeper, there was a sense of assimilation going on and experiencing microaggressions on a daily basis. And the staff findings were in direct opposition to this as well. I identified places and spaces on the campus that included and excluded students, and again, looking at the context for that. The most commonly answered question in my research was, did people say your name correctly? Every single one of the research participants just had something to say about this, and it really frustrated them when people didn't say their name correctly, mispronounced it. They felt sometimes they couldn't correct people. I suppose your name is huge. It's a huge part of your identity and getting to know someone. And it's as simple and as complex as that, finding out people's names. As I said, there was daily experiences of microaggressions on campus based on, their identity, their appearance, their skin color. And inside the classroom, for the most part, they felt quite included, but that there was issues around the content in terms of a lot of the curriculum was very Eurocentric in nature, and maybe we didn't consider other parts of the world. So just to wrap up, some key facts about unconscious bias are implicit biases you'd often hear it referred to. These are our experiences, our patterns. We get a lot of it from the media and the culture that we've been socialized into. Being biased is part of who we all are. We all have a blind spot, and being aware of it is really the first step. And just to watch those triggers again, when you're under pressure or emotional load, that's really when your biases can kick in. So self-reflect, educate yourself, read around this, check information when you're unsure from other groups that you feel aren't representative of you. And I guess if possible, to challenge other people about those assumptions and stereotypes that they make. So thank you for listening to me. Again, I'm passionate about this area. I'm happy to talk about this all day, every day to anyone who listen. That's my email address. And also you can follow me on Twitter. If there's anything else you want to follow up on that's not possible here today, I'm happy to speak with you.
Fionnuala,
thank you.
Just before you go, we actually do have two questions in there that I might just put to you before we leave.
Sure.
Are some people more prone to using system 1 over system 2 when making decisions? Is a question that we have there.
Sorry, our people, is that what was the start of it?
Our people, A or E, our people. Are some people more prone to using system 1 over system 2 when making decisions? And then we have another question, just do we have a breakdown of the nationalities of the TU Dublin teachers? This talk is very interesting, and it would be nice for it to get repeated during the year. So that's a compliment for you, Fionnuala.
Great. Thanks very much for that. As I said, I'm happy to talk about this anytime to anyone who listens, so I can certainly hook in and run this again, or a version of it. System 1 and system 2 brain, I think our unconscious brain automatically bypasses the conscious brain. So generally speaking, most of us are prone to that quicker brain kicking in. But the fact that you're aware of unconscious bias and reading around it and learning about it and watching yourself slows that down. So you kind of have to be open to this to try and slow that brain down, because our default position is for that rapid brain to kick in. And with regard to staff, was it, Linda, in higher?
Yes, the other question then is relating to staff in TU Dublin. I'm not sure if you know this, but you might even know it just even on Blanchardstown campus. Do we have a breakdown of the nationalities of the TU Dublin teachers by any chance?
Well, I don't have access to that information, but I do know that there is the HEA requiring those statistics to look at ethnicity, because these can become sort of choking points in terms of career progression. I did interview staff for my research. I sent out a research call to all staff by email, and of the staff that replied, every one of them was white and Irish, except for one. And that will be representative, certainly, of our campus. I'm very aware of that. A white academy with white scholarship, yet our classrooms are becoming increasingly diverse. So it is something that needs to be looked into further. Absolutely.
Okay, that's everything, Fionnuala. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You were fantastic and very interesting talk there.
Good. So, happy to share that.